guys, we're back. And we're getting to that point now. We just finished part one of Band of Brothers. I hope you enjoyed it. I think you'll really love those characters because remember that not only are they great actors, but they're actually playing real people. And so the guys you see at the beginning are those real characters, and you'll find out who those are at the end. Um, so we just have a few more things to do before we can watch part two, which is actually D-Day. Because remember, D-Day is in 1944 and the war starts in 41 for us. So there's a couple of big events that happened beforehand. And one of those is Stalingrad. So let's take a look at our notes. All right, let's talk about the Battle of Stalingrad. The code word for this was Operation Barbarossa in the military. And this was Germany's invasion of Russia. And it was very, very successful. This is way back in 1941. And you'll notice that they start here and they get all the way almost to Moscow up here. They basically go halfway into the Soviet Union, and it is a massive assault. Where did it take place? The battle we're talking about, Stalingrad, which is not called Stalingrad anymore because they don't really want to remember it as Joseph Stalin's place. It's called Volgograd today for the Volga River, and we'll show that to you in just a moment. It took place in August 1942 to February of 1943. So this took place for over a month. And here's what's happening. Think of Stalingrad like a siege. The Germans took over Stalingrad, and the Russians are trying to take it back over and over and over again. And to be real with you, it is just sheer numbers that makes it happen. Lots and lots of people died to take this city. Who was involved? The Soviets versus the Germans. So notice here's where Stalingrad is located, or Volgograd today. Okay. The purpose, the Germans had taken their most powerful city. And it was a huge loss to Stalin for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's named after him. So that's kind of a moral victory for the Germans for sure, and a moral loss for the Russians. Secondly, it is a huge city and a huge transportation hub. There are at least 6 different roads that go into this city. They have the major Volga River that you see right over here. And they also have railroad crossings going into this city. And remember that if you're fighting in someone else's territory, you have to make sure you can supply your troops, or they're dead in the water. They don't have guns, they don't have food, they don't have tanks, they don't have anything. So they have to make sure that they can get supplies to their soldiers, or they're in trouble, especially in freezing cold Russia, right? So if you notice here, you'll see here are the Germans entrenched around this area. And here's the city of Stalingrad right here. And then here are your Soviet forces around the outside here. And they also came across the river, as you'll see in our movie clip that we're going to watch. Why is this battle important? It is the bloodiest standoff of the entire war. Over 1 million casualties and 199 days of fighting. It is considered the turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. Because remember, the Germans are fighting on the east against Russia, and they're fighting against the Allies, England, France, the United States, Belgium, everybody on the Western Front. But when they finally take this city back, the Soviets do, this is where they finally start pushing those Germans out and pushing them back into their own country. Eventually, it is a Russian victory. And we also have to remember that the Allies, especially the Soviet Union, begged the United States to come and help them fight on that front. And we refused. We said, we're going to fight together where we're at, and we're fighting on the Western Front. So, you got to feel bad for those Soviets. They took huge losses. And the other thing that we need to mention is that the Germans did horrible things to the Soviet people when they took over that territory, just like, the Japanese did horrible things to the Chinese, like in the rape of Nanking. So when the Soviets start pushing the Germans out, If you talk to some of my old buddies that used to be World War II vets, they're not around anymore. They said they didn't want to be anywhere near the Soviets at the end of the war, because when the Soviets came back into those German towns, they did bad things to the German people as well. In fact, some of our guys would tell the women, get out of town. The Soviets are coming behind us and they're not going to be real nice to you. So you better get out of here. This decision to not help out and fight on the Eastern Front will cost us future relations with the Soviets and really start the Cold War right after the war. So, kind of interesting. First of all, take a look at some of our losses here. And again, I don't want you to have to memorize these numbers. It's just to give you a picture. The Germans had 750,000 guys killed, wounded, or captured. Now, notice that isn't just Germans. It also is Romanians, Hungarians, and Italians. Some of them chose to fight with them. Some of them were forced to fight with the Germans. The Soviets had over 1 million killed, captured, or wounded. Now compare that to the total losses on D-Day, which everybody knows about D-Day, right? 20,000 on both sides combined. Over 1 million on the Soviet side alone, and 750,000 on the German side. So you can see why it is the bloodiest battle of the war. It really is. Interesting pictures that you see here. First of all, look at these are Russian soldiers in that winter white, so they're camouflaged, trying to basically take back their city. And then when they finally did take the city back, all of these German troops surrendered. 91,000 of them surrendered. Here's the sad part, and this is why we end up in the Cold War. Less than 6,000 of that 91,000 survived the camps when they were POWs in the 1950s. So obviously, Soviets weren't doing very nice things to the Germans either. Yeah. Now, what I'd like to do at this point, if you have the capability, I'd like you to watch these two clips. They're actually on YouTube, or you can look them up on your phone. This is from the movie Enemy at the Gates, and it just shows you what it was like for these Soviet troops. First of all, crossing the Volga River, the Soviets were so desperate for soldiers that they didn't even take time to train them anymore by this point. They basically take you from your hometown, put a uniform on you, locked you in a railroad car, and took you to the front lines, and then you were ready to fight. And so they're basically, you'll see in the scene, they're indoctrinating them and telling them, you're doing this for your country, go Soviets. And they're just getting slaughtered by the Luftwaffe, the German pilots, as they're crossing the river. And take a look at what happens if you tried to leave the boat. The second scene shows the Soviets attacking the Germans on land. And what's really interesting is notice that the guys are like one gun to every other guy. Imagine being forced to attack the enemy and you don't even have a gun in your hand. All you have is a handful of bullets. Nothing to protect yourself or to attack. And you just wait until someone gets shot and you hopefully pick a gun up off the ground. So go ahead and check out those clips if you have a moment. Another movie I'd highly recommend is the movie Stalingrad as well. Both really good movies. Okay, our next event is Operation Torch. So this is the first event where the U.S. is fighting. And guess where we fight? Africa. What in the world is going on? They're begging for our help. In Russia, they're begging for our help in England, and we're fighting in North Africa. So let's talk about why. First of all, let me show you this map. It is a three-pronged attack on three major cities in North Africa: Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers. You'll notice that the English attacked on these two cities, and the U.S. attacked Casablanca. And if you've heard of the old movie Casablanca, that's what this is based on. Well, it's from that time period. Let's just say that. Okay, when did it take place? November of 1942. Remember that we declared war on December 8th, 1941, but we had to take time to train our soldiers. So this is the first major attack that we have. Who is involved? The U.S., the British, and the Free French. are fighting against the Germans, the Italians, and the Vichy French. So let's talk about what that word Vichy means. French were split in half. Half of them decided to be allies with the United States and England, and the other half were allies with Germany. So you talk about some real mistrust with your neighbors and your family members. There were a lot of people that turned in other people that they knew, neighbors that were working with the allies and stuff like that. So it was an amphibious attack with air support. What does an amphibious attack mean? It means that we basically went from water to land. We used those ducks that maybe you've seen on D-Day in movies, things like that. Oh, here we go. Here's a picture that we're looking for. See how we're coming in from the water and attacking on the beach? Now, why did we attack there? First, it was to push the Italians and Germans out of Africa. We also believed it would be a good backdoor to attack Italy and take them out first and then work our way up into Germany. That was kind of the thought. So a lot of our veterans at the beginning of the war, 41 to 43 especially, are fighting over in North Africa or in Italy. So the Russians are absolutely furious, right? They've been begging for our help. And where do we go? We fight in Africa. Why is the question? Well, number one, let's be real. We thought it would be an easy win. And we wanted to kind of get some experience under our guys' belts, give them a little practice, give them a little confidence before we went up against the big German machine in Europe. So we decided to attack here at Operation Torch first. Didn't make the Russians very happy, or the English for that matter. What happened? It was an easy win for the Allies, and we took these cities pretty easily. Why is it important? The Axis were pushed back. The U.S. soldiers got some practice, and we got a little bit of a back door into Italy. Did it ever really help us get all the way into Germany? I wouldn't say that, but it did help us get some victories. And eventually, Italy kind of decides to take Mussolini themselves, and we get Italy out of the picture. Now, there were three people that became rather famous at Operation Torch. The first is General Patton. Patton, remember, is a tank general. And if you're reading the Harold Riggs letters coming up, my Uncle Harold, he was a gunner on a tank for Patton. He was very successful here, so he made the news. Germany has a really famous general named General Rommel. He became known as the Desert Fox for his great stuff over in Africa. And the British had General Montgomery, who was also a tank general, and he becomes rather famous because of this operation too. Okay, so in our notes, please understand, here's what we're going to do. Because we're watching Band of Brothers, at least a few of those episodes, we're going to do kind of the European theater first, and then we're going to go into the Pacific theater and just talk about the major battles with each. So just a reminder that Germany is fighting a two-front war, East against the Soviets, and of course, West against England, Belgium, the Netherlands, the French over here. Okay? And the goal is to push those Germans back. Take a look at this map. I mean, my goodness. This is all territory controlled by the Germans. All of it. And guess what's next? England's going to fall next, right? That's where they're attacking. So that's why the U.S. is wanting to be involved, and they're asking for their help. On the Eastern Front, the Russians are, of course, trying to push the Germans out of the Soviet Union back into Germany, too. The next major event is in the fall of 1943, and that is the Tehran Conference. It's going to give you a clue about where it took place, easy for your test, because Tehran is in Iran, right? Who was involved? This is where FDR, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met. It was a secret meeting, because obviously if the enemy knew, they might get killed, right? The purpose was to discuss strategy of fighting Germany. Here's what happened. Number one, Stalin is still asking for help on that second front. And we basically say no until later on. The Soviets, even though we say that, will enter versus Japan 30 days after the end of the war in Europe. So after hopefully they defeat Germany, they will help us against the war against Japan. And probably the most important thing about the Tehran Conference, we said that we need to create a UN, a United Nations, to solve these international disputes so our leaders can talk before we start another world war. Because we've had World War I, we've now had World War II. We don't want another one. So that was kind of the point. All right, I'm going to leave you for now. And in our next part, we're going to talk about D-Day. See you then.